Hey guys, and welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. We have a special show for you tonight. I'll be joined by Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi is a former member of Congress, a former Democratic presidential candidate. She also served in the U.S. Army Reserves. And Tulsi is the author of the new book, For the Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind. This is going to be an interesting interview. I think it's going to be a great one. You won't want to miss it. She's been attacked and smeared by the left ever since she took on the dogma of the Democrat Party. And she has an incredible story to tell. I know there's people in the commentary, some absolutely love her, vice presidential material, some don't. So let's get to all of the details and actually try to assess what's really going on. I imagine most people know their stuff from the mainstream media, and we're going to try to break through all of that. So make sure you're watching, make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing so you never miss another one of these major episodes. Also, guys, head over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you missed an episode here, we will post it up there. If you know people who otherwise get their podcast that way, make sure you like it, share it, whatever it is from over there so that they can see this and we can get the message out. And for all of the top headlines we cover here on the show, head over to my news app, MXM News, where the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. Obviously, we're dealing with bias all the time. You can get it without that, and we'll try to curate these things so that you can see a little bit of everything. It's actually left-wing, right-wing, give you both. You decide, because it's about you guys making these decisions, not being fed and spoon-fed a narrative day in and day out. And so we will begin with a rundown of the top stories that matter most. Joe Biden spent the weekend apologizing. No, he didn't apologize to Steve Niku, who was arrested at the State of the Union after drawing attention to his son's death in Afghanistan. Biden didn't apologize to Laken Riley's family for mispronouncing Laken's name, or more importantly, for letting Laken's killer into the country. No. Joe Biden apologized for calling Jose Ibarra, Laken Riley's killer, an illegal at the State of the Union.
Surprise on your face when you walked into the chamber and you saw Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was priceless. You feigned shock at seeing her. But during your response to her heckling of you, you used the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country. The reason our economy is growing. We have to control the border and more orderly flow, but I don't share his view at all.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
I mean, seriously? Did you catch that? He said illegals built the country. What the hell is Joe Biden talking about? Biden's bending over backwards to make sure that the feelings of a murderer, of a killer in cold blood aren't hurt, because I'm sure he cares whether he's called an illegal or undocumented. Are you shitting me? Notice that Joe Biden talks with more care about an illegal immigrant murderer than he does about MAGA and many great patriotic Americans who want to put America first. He treats criminals better than he treats Americans. Listen for yourselves.
What's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
Joe Biden is controlled by the radicals in his party. That's why he's apologized to Laken Riley's killer, the murderer, not the family, not for his policies that allowed that to happen, but to the murderer. And that's why he's sending 1,000 troops to build a port in Gaza. Last week, I told you that Biden would be putting American troops in harm's way. Well, on Friday, the Pentagon confirmed that there's a risk Hamas tries to attack U.S. operations there.
That Hamas will try to fire on the operation, on the causeway?
Look, I mean, that's certainly a risk. Again, but if if Hamas truly does care about the Palestinian people, then again, one would hope that this international mission to deliver aid to people who need it would be able to happen unhindered. Tony.
The Pentagon seems to have entirely too much faith in Hamas. That general was asked, quote, does the DOD anticipate that Hamas will try to fire on them on the operation? He replied, look, I mean, that's certainly a risk, again, but if Hamas truly does care about the Palestinian people, then again, one would hope that this international mission to deliver aid to the people who need it would be able to happen unhindered. End of quote. Really? I mean, obviously they don't truly care about the Palestinian people. This administration is in an alternate universe. These are people, Hamas, that murdered women and children, raped them in the streets. They then hide in schools and mosques, using children and other women, their own, as human shields. I promise you, they do not care about the Palestinian people, and if you think they do, you are an imbecile. I should note that tomorrow is a big day, though, guys. Special Counsel Robert Hur will be testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, and he will address in detail just how forgetful Joe Biden is. Will Hur address how Joe Biden put national security at risk and lied about how he didn't care about classified information and the sharing thereof? Will he get into those details? Will they question his competence and the man that clearly is incompetent having control of the nuclear football and making life and death decisions for so many Americans? Probably not, but hopefully we'll get some answers to this stuff. Meanwhile, residents in Pittsburgh apparently need to load up on guns and ammo. You should be doing this anyway, given the world in which we live because of Democrat policies. But police just announced in Pittsburgh that there will basically be no policing at nighttime anymore.
The big takeaway today.
Yeah, Susan, residents of the city will see a major change in the way police respond. They will no longer respond to calls that aren't considered in-progress emergency. That means calls like criminal mischief, theft, harassment, and most burglary alarms will all be handled by an enhanced telephone reporting unit. That means residents will file a police report over the phone. Officers will not respond unless it's an emergency. Also, between the hours of 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., there will be no officers at any of the 6 stations throughout the city. Call boxes that link directly to 911 have been installed for people to use in case of an emergency. And during the overnight shift, there will be as few as 20 officers to cover the entire city.
Wow. Now, guys, would it surprise you if I told you that in 2020, the Pittsburgh City Council passed a bill that would, quote, defund police, recruit, and first-year police officers line items in the Bureau's 2020 budget? Huh. Shocking. It turns out that there are actually consequences to defunding the police. Who could have possibly seen that coming? I'm shocked, folks. This is what happens when you have morons implementing equally moronic Democrat policy in our cities. I'm sure that one's going to work out well. Well, over in New York City, the FDNY, the Fire Department of New York, has launched an investigation to track down the firemen who booed Letitia James and chanted Trump.
Oh, come on, we're in a house of God. First, simmer down. I want to thank Commissioner Kavanaugh and Chief Hodgins for that recognition.
The FDNY's chief of department wrote, I recommend that they come forward. I've been told by the commissioner it will be better for them if they come forward and we don't have to hunt them down. So, just so we're clear, folks, those firefighters will be hunted down. The great men and women of the FDNY will be hunted down for not liking a politicized attorney general. Now, I imagine if they chanted pro things for the Democrats as opposed to against Democrat policy in a one-party Democrat city, they'd be just fine. If they did anti-Trump stuff, but of course the FDNY, at least the door kickers, the real guys, the real firemen, clearly America first patriots. But Letitia James isn't going to face any consequences for abusing her campaign dollars. It just came out that she spent thousands of campaign dollars on a luxury trip to Puerto Rico. Apparently, that's just fine, folks, because, you You're going after Trump. You're doing the bidding of the Democrat deep state, but booing Democrat elected officials. Well, that's apparently across the line because we live in clown world. Now, I wish our problems were only here on the ground. Unfortunately, they continue to be issues at 30,000 feet in the sky. For example, United Airlines has had 4 emergencies in 1 week, including a tire falling off the plane and an engine catching on fire in another instance. United, you guys may remember, is the airline that chooses employees based on race, gender, and identity. Is it possible, just possibly, that this isn't exactly a good idea? Remember their drag queen CEO, Scott Kirby? Well, this is how he talks about diversity. So you may want to think about this before getting on a United flight ever again.
How is diversity and diversity targets working into the Aviate Academy?
We have committed that 50% of the classes will be women or people of color. Today, only 19% of our pilots at United Airlines are women or people of color. And by the way, from all the data I've seen, that's the highest of any airline in the country.
I don't know about you guys. I couldn't care less. I just want the best people flying planes and maintaining them. I think even the craziest liberals probably feel the same way. They may not admit it out loud, but this is getting ridiculous. It's only going to get worse. But finally, guys, the deep state is getting aggressive and open about its corruption. Adam Schiff just went on TV and ordered the intelligence agencies of America to not reveal information in its intelligence precincts to my father once he's the nominee.
Hope, and knowing the intelligence community as I do, that they will dumb down the briefing for Donald Trump. That is, they will give him no more information than absolutely necessary, nothing that would reveal sources or methods.
Did you hear Schiff say, knowing the intelligence community as I do? This is like when Chuck Schumer said, let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. This is a direct threat from Schiff, someone who's lied to the American people over and over again, abused his power as the director of the Intelligence Committee in the House. He lied about me for years, never faced any consequences. It didn't matter. He was doing the bidding of like-minded individuals in the deep state in Washington. But like the threat from Schumer, the swamp is getting nervous about the November election. You may have heard Matt Boyle lay that out on the show last week. The deep state is already moving to put Peter Navarro in prison. Peter was a great Trump White House trade advisor. He was an expert on China. He was a China hawk that put them in their place. And the Biden DOJ wants him to report to federal prison in Florida next week. This is all over Navarro refusing to comply with the sham January 6th committee. This is clearly an attempt at punishing a strong MAGA supporter. All Democrats have is fake news, false narratives, and outright lies. That's what they do. That's who they are. For example, we also learned over the weekend that Liz Cheney, shockingly, folks, I'm totally shocked, hid exonerating Trump evidence that he did not, in fact, authorize National Guards ahead of January 6th. That he did, in fact. We've said this for years. Everyone knows it's true. Everyone pretended it wasn't. Of course he did. But Nancy Pelosi, the mayor, Muriel Bowser at the time, wouldn't allow them to do it. That's according to newly revealed transcript that Cheney and the sham committee had hidden from the public, just like they hid the January 6th videos of people in there being escorted around and acting peacefully. The former White House Deputy Chief of Staff testified about hearing then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows discussing getting troops, but that D.C. Mayor Bowser declined to put in the request. But Cheney didn't want the public to know that. I wonder why. Well, guys, it doesn't stop there. Now, I know this may be hard to believe, but remember Cassidy Hutchinson, who was rolled out there without reproach? Remember the bizarre story about my father trying to grab a hold of the steering wheel in the Beast? Not exactly an easy logistical feat, but who cares? It sounded great. He was going to drive it, beat the hell out of a couple Secret Service agents. Well, the driver of the Beast, Tony Ornato, testified to the January 6th committee that my father never lunged for the steering wheel or tried to assault Secret Service officers. I'm shocked, folks. I can't believe that. I mean, there's a component of me that may like it more if he did, given the insanity of all this bullshit. At least you get a good story out of it. But why is all of this only being released now? Because the sham January 6th committee was never about the truth. Just like they didn't discuss the bombs at the RNC and the DNC. That was just a backup plan for the story they were able to manipulate ad nauseum. And it was entirely about smearing MAGA. Just like Russiagate. It didn't have to be even a pretense of the truth. The media will do the bidding. They'll come up with the fake sources. They'll get everyone outraged. And the people who aren't paying attention closely believe it as though it's the gospel. All these deep state swamp creatures have left is making up lies and hoping that the media and hoping that big tech go along with it, which they always do. But speaking of which, we do end on a bit of good news, as the woke sports site Deadspin had its whole staff laid off under new ownership. This is sort of the feel-good story of the day, because remember Deadspin? This is the same website that smeared a young child for dressing up like a Kansas City Chief in uniform colors to support his favorite football team. They tried to destroy a young child and attacked him and claimed it was blackface. To put it simply, in the end, woke goes broke, folks. Maybe the Deadspin writers will find some time and learn to code or whatever it is, that insults that they probably threw at the miners when they're laid off, or the guys that were laying Keystone Pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. They'll probably just be replaced by and go on continuing to be worthless individuals that we know them to be. We'll get into all of this and so much more with Tulsi Gabbard in just a few moments. But quickly, a fast word from our sponsors who have the guts to keep supporting this show. First and foremost, guys, our primary sponsor tonight, right here at Rumble. I'm excited to introduce you to the Rumble Cloud Services, which will provide content creators and businesses with products and services they need to succeed. Rumble has built the cloud for the parallel economy, so you don't have to worry about being canceled or censored, put away by big tech giants and losing everything. You don't have to be beholden to Amazon. And the Rumble Cloud pricing model will be lower, it'll be cheaper, you'll save, increase savings, give you more predictable budget, and exclusively for friends of Rumble, sign up today at friends.rumble.cloud. That's friends.rumble.cloud, and receive 30% off the first 3 months of your cloud subscription, which will be available for purchase this spring. And like I said, it's affordable service that is supported by independent infrastructure, not just a back end to Amazon, independent infrastructure and not linked to big tech, so you won't get canceled by the woke mob. So head over to friends.rumble.cloud and sign up today. And guys, we talk about it all the time, protecting not just your finances, but also protecting your health. It's a great time to start getting heart-healthy energy. Super Beets Heart Chews are an easy, plant-based way to support healthy blood pressure and circulations. Super Beets is the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Super Beets are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure and a healthy lifestyle alone. Double your potential with Super Beet Heart Chews. Get a 30-day supply on all bundles and an extra 15% off your order by going to getsuperbeets.com using promo code TRIGGERED. That's getsuperbeets.com, code TRIGGERED, and save. And with that, joining me now, author of the new book, For Love of Country, former Hawaiian Congresswoman, presidential candidate, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, great to have you with us here today.
Hey, Don. Finally, we keep missing each other every time.
I know, like ships passing in the night. We literally miss each other by like 6 hours. So I'm so really excited about having this conversation. I'm glad we're doing it now because it's sort of interesting. I leave my comments up here on the live stream, and even for the last couple of months, you're thrown out as a VP potential hopeful. Some people love, some people scared. They don't know what to sort of make of it. But you've been pretty clear. You've been attacked by the Democrat Party. When did you realize you no longer fit that party mold? What moments really stand out to you in all of this?
Well, Don, before you came on, or actually when you first started your opening comments, I took a look at the comments coming in as well, and to all of you who have questions or concerns, this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book. I joined the Democratic Party over 20 years ago when I first ran for State House here in Hawaii. I was 21 years old. The Democratic Party looked completely different back then, even 10 years ago, looked quite different than it does today. I can't tell you that there was one singular moment that caused me to say, okay, this is it. The Democratic Party has left me behind. But it was a continued escalation of events and comments and the overall mentality that showed that the Democrat Party of today does not care about our country. They don't care about the Constitution. They certainly don't care about the American people. They care about one thing, and that's power. And everything that we've seen play out in the Biden administration over the last 3.5 years points to exactly that objective. Whether we're talking about what's happening at the border, or we're talking about the lawfare and the misuse of the Department of Justice and law enforcement to go after their foremost political opponent, President Trump, as well as others who have the audacity just to challenge their position or speak up in opposition to it, they too are targeted. I go into my book. My book is For Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind. And I go into each of these really big issues that I wanted to focus on that all kind of center into our fundamental rights, our God-given rights and freedoms enshrined in the Constitution, and how the Democrat Party of today is doing all that they possibly can to undermine those rights and take away our very identity of who we are as Americans in this great country.
So, when I'm looking at the comments now, I think it seems, one of the big concerns is, about the Second Amendment. Obviously, you're a veteran. You've served. You understand that. And lately, I've seen you actually hanging out with some of my buddies, over at Sons of Liberty Gunworks. I know I do stuff with them with my sort of outdoor publication and my crazy other lives. Talk a little bit about that, because there seems to be sort of, has there been a change in that? Is there just a more of an understanding, of the Second Amendment, because it's the one that seems to repeat itself a lot. I'd love you to just be able to address it for the crowd.
Yeah, of course. Now, I grew up here in Hawaii, where, as you probably know, it's one of the most restrictive gun ownership states in the country. I certainly didn't grow up in any kind of gun culture or things like some of my friends and your friends, where they grew up around guns ever since they were kids. I probably shot a pistol with my dad a couple of times and didn't touch a rifle until I joined the military. And even then, for those of you who may be watching who served in the military, you know how restrictive the military is with firearms for safety reasons. You sign your rifle out, you go to the range, you qualify, or you do your training event. Every single bullet is accounted for. Every single rifle is carefully accounted for. And of course, it's locked up at the end of the day. So I've always held the position that I support the Second Amendment and understood our intrinsic right as humans to defend ourselves and to defend our loved ones. I got to tell you, as time went on, and I spent a lot of time, especially over my campaign for president and the years since, with a lot of folks in New Hampshire and Iowa and different parts of the country who had a very different experience than I did growing up. And they raised a lot of concerns around some of the things that throughout my time in Congress had all been coined as, well, this is common sense gun safety laws. This is well-intentioned in order to try to make sure that our communities are safe. Yeah. That's a pretty compelling argument. But as with many things in Washington, as you know well, once you start peeling back the surface, you can understand that for a lot of folks who are using those words, they don't have good intentions at all. Their real objective is to try to get rid of the Second Amendment and take away our right to own firearms and our right to defend ourselves. And even more pointedly, especially with where we are now and where the Biden-Harris administration has taken us, our founders intended the Second Amendment to be a check on the abuse of power by a tyrannical government. And when you look back at the things that started to roll out throughout COVID, when you look at what the Biden-Harris administration has done, where they're using the power of our law enforcement, the county, state, and federal level in different ways, using the power of the Department of Justice, the power of the national security state against American citizens. You had that clip of Representative Adam Schiff there in your opening, one of the biggest offenders of this, where they have no issue using the secret FISA court to surveil Americans illegally without a warrant. They have no issue sicking the FBI or other law enforcement agencies against American citizens who've done nothing wrong other than exercise their right to free speech. So over time, my increased understanding, my being able to have some really great and honest conversations with Americans who cherish our freedom, who cherish the Second Amendment, helped me better understand what it really meant. My husband and I are gun owners and recently competed in the tactical games for the first time. I appreciate and respect every American's right to own a gun or not to own a gun.
So, talk about do some of your former Democrat colleagues, do they agree with you, not just about the Second Amendment, but sort of all the things you talked about, sort of, how the party left you, their hills to die on are, clearly very different than so many things that would actually be of interest to the American public and the American people. Are they with you, or do they just, on board with defunding the police and open borders? And I've noticed the Democrats, they're really good at just getting in line, right? They don't argue. If they get 51% of what they want, they take the win, and then they start chipping away at it the next day, where, on the Republican side, they can be 99% in agreement, and some guy will blow up the entire thing. Sometimes, just politics, you got to take those incremental wins. Are there some former colleagues of yours that are more common sense, or is that just sort of just out of the Democrat Party these days because it's the only way to survive?
No, I know that there are some, but I can't tell you how many, because the Democrat Party leadership has done such a powerful job in forcing them to self-censor, in creating this culture and atmosphere where if you don't fall in line, you'll face the consequences. I experienced some of this myself from my very first year in Congress in 2013. I talk about this in my book in a lot of detail, but also I've had members of Congress, even as I was running for president of the Democratic primary, where the Democrat Party leadership wasn't very happy with me, to say the least. Hillary Clinton set her sights on me, was trying everything she possibly could and using
that's
all
like
of
a badge of honor, just so we're clear.
Me.
But
I know.
Maybe now more so than then.
It is. But even back then, as all of this was happening, I was still in Congress. So I would go and I'd go on the House floor and cast my votes, and had some of my Democrat colleagues. As I was walking, I know you've been on the House floor. As you're walking around that back corner, there's a little spot there where the C-SPAN cameras don't catch. And they would pull me aside and whisper in my ear and say, "Tulsi, you're doing such a great job. Keep it up, but don't tell anybody I told you this."
Yeah.
And it's just, we can laugh about it, but it's really quite sad, because it shows how weak these people are, who've been put in a position of great responsibility to serve their constituents and serve the American people. And instead of doing that, they're more focused on serving the wishes of their Democrat Party bosses.
So how do we change that? I mean, you're 100% right, and frankly, the Republicans are guilty of the same thing. I hear Mitch McConnell telling people all the time, Ukraine is the number one issue for Republicans across America. It's like zero Republicans across America outside of D.C. think it's a number one issue, but it doesn't stop them from legislating accordingly, right? They have all that power. How do you change that? How do you change it in the Democrat Party, which frankly I think much more organized and it has a lot more sort of groupthink and just towing the line? How do you make that an inroads into that to get people to break from that? Just, hey, this is the byline and we're sticking with it.
Look, the number one way is to hold them accountable, and you hold them accountable both at the ballot box and forcing transparency while they're in office. Don't let them off the hook. They go to Washington and they live in their little bubble that's completely out of touch with reality. They pat each other on the back and say, "Hey, good job. You're doing this and you're doing that. And thank you for your leadership," and all this other stuff, when the consequences of their policies are actually harming the American people. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to put that 1 + 1 = 2 in their policies and the consequences of those policies, and the fact that they are not serving the interests of the American people. We've got to hold them accountable at the ballot box. They think that we're so stupid that they can go for 3+ years with a completely open border, and then now, just months before a general election, come and say, "Hey, we're the tough on border security party. We would have done this sooner if not for the Republicans, giving us all of these excuses and lies because they really think we're stupid, Don. They think the American people are stupid and that we'll fall for whatever lie they throw out at us. So the number one thing we have to do, there's a lot of changes that need to be made, but the number one thing we have to do is not let them get away with it. Because if we do, they're going to continue this nonsense. And you think it's bad now, it'll only get much worse.
So, what drew you into politics in the first place, right? Hawaii doesn't exactly feel like all that political a state, although I guess they gave you Obama. But how did growing up there shape your worldview? What's changed, since?
I grew up. I grew up experiencing from a really young age that I was happiest when I was doing my best to serve, to be of service to God and God's children, and do good things for other people, try to have that positive impact. And so I never once imagined that I would enter into the realm of politics. Super shy as a kid. I was not interested in talking to strangers or doing anything in any kind of public way. But for me, I first learned how to swim in the ocean. And so growing up here in Hawaii, it's a beautiful place. I cared a lot about protecting it, making sure that our oceans were clean and we preserved these natural open spaces that we all love and care about. And so my first, my decision to run for office in Hawaii was not at all a decision of like, okay, I'm going to launch a political career. It really just came from a turning point and a decision in my life. I was 21 years old. I didn't have a college degree, and I had to make a decision. I could either go to school and earn a degree in political science or whatever else, or I could actually go and try to do the work of fixing the problems that my community and our state was facing. There was an open state house seat in my neighborhood, and I decided, why talk about it when you should just actually do it. And so I ran for office and was elected at 21 and served in different offices. I've been in and out of politics throughout all these years, but really those decisions in my life, both in politics as well as to enlist in the military, have all been centered around a constant self-assessment and question of how can I best be of service.
Well, so you're a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves, and yet
Yes.
I see TV pundits who've never served, who probably hate America, attack you as some sort of Russia lover. What does that come from? What do you make of those attacks?
I think you're probably pretty familiar with those attacks yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I am. I'm a Russia lover because I don't feel we should spend $1 trillion in a war in Ukraine that we haven't articulated what victory looks like. That's just me because apparently I'm stupid. But I'm a Putin apologist and a Russia lover. Basically, I work for them, according to the mainstream press.
And this is the same tired line they throw out anytime they see someone who is speaking a truth that they're afraid of, who threatens their power and exposes them for who they really are. For me, this started, the very first time this happened, Don, was the day I announced my candidacy. I was running for president in February of 2019. I had heard, we got some media inquiry from NBC News that they were doing some story about Russian influence on elections. Their questions were very vague. And we asked them, okay, I'm busy right now. What's your deadline? They said, oh, we're not going to publish the story for another week. Well, 2 days later, when I announced that I was running for president, they bumped the story up and published it online as I was walking on stage to make that announcement of my candidacy. So that was the first moment I knew that they had set their sights on me and that they were going to use the same old playbook that tries to gin up suspicion from some the old Cold War era with the USSR and try to invoke suspicion in voters' minds that somehow I was someone who couldn't be trusted. We saw Hillary Clinton use this line. I've heard it over and over and over again from people in the propaganda media. But every time it's thrown out there, as you well know, there's no evidence. There's no basis for this. There's no credibility to it. And it's not only the Democrat elite. I heard you talk about Mitt Romney earlier. He did the same thing not that long ago because I had the audacity to question what was going on in Ukraine. And more specifically, I said, hey, there's a war going on in that country right now. We have multiple US DoD funded biolabs in Ukraine. We need to secure those sites and empty them out because God forbid they get attacked and whatever pathogens or whatever they got going on in there, that could pose a great risk, not only to the people of Ukraine, but could start something else that could threaten the public health of the world. For that, Mitt Romney called me a treasonous liar. I challenged him, sent him a legal letter to cease and desist. Naturally, no response, because they have no response. They got nothing to say.
You're 100% right. Why on
sticks.
earth would we have bioweapon labs or bio labs in Ukraine? Because we're probably doing stuff that would be illegal to do here, and yet no one talks about it. By the way, probably just like gain-of-function research in Wuhan. It doesn't matter. As long as we can kind of sub it out and have a little plausible deniability, no one here faces any ramifications for stuff that would otherwise be grossly illegal. And questioning that makes you the enemy of the people somehow.
Yeah, the funny thing with that was when I made that statement, I had a feeling I might get some attacks for it. So I listed out very clearly and did the same in my legal letter to Mitt Romney, what my sources were for that. And the number one source on my list was from the DOD. On their website, they had listed down how for decades they've been funding this biolab research, not only in Ukraine, but as you said, in other parts of the world. Victoria Nuland from the State Department, she was in an open U.S. Senate hearing saying what I said. She said, yes, we have biolabs in Ukraine and we're trying to secure them so that they don't cause a risk to others if they are compromised. So it's this insanity where if you dare to question the warmongers or challenge the warmongers in Washington simply by speaking the truth, they immediately resort to the Russia playbook and hope that they don't ever have to answer for what's actually behind that, because there's nothing.
So how does that sort of the endless war machine in D.C., why is it so effective at dragging us into these conflicts? Again, they're never-ending wars. They're called that. No one seems to know why we're there. It doesn't matter. We're sending lives and trillions of dollars and our children's future. Yeah, how does that all work? Why do so many members of Congress just go along with it every time? It doesn't seem like we win any of these conflicts. We just further put ourselves into debt and maim so many great patriotic Americans while depleting our resources that could be used to defend ourselves against real threats.
The heart of the problem is that they care about power and money more than they care about the country, the American people, and my brothers and sisters in uniform. That's really the gross and disgusting truth of it all. When President Eisenhower warned us in his farewell address against the military-industrial complex and their cozy relationship, both with Congress as well as the executive branch, he spoke the truth because he saw it then, and we are seeing it on steroids now. Back in, I forget exactly what month it was, a little over a year ago, the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives, finally, 30 of them sent a letter to President Biden, essentially asking him to do all he could to end the war in Ukraine, pointing out that there is a huge risk of nuclear war if this war is allowed to continue. Yeah. What to speak of the fiscal cost and the human cost of this war ongoing. That letter wasn't released for more than 24 hours when the White House obviously sent them a strong message, and they retracted it with some lame excuse of saying, oh, well, the staff sent the letter out prematurely.
Sure they did.
It's such crap.
Sure
they were revealed for having maybe just for a moment a sliver of courage in seeing what needed to happen, but immediately buckled, bent the knee, and cowered in the corner as the White House laid down the law and said, don't you dare challenge President Biden or you will face the consequences. And they see what happens to people like me, who was once a part of the Democrat Party, and how I was ostracized and smeared and canceled and attacked. They don't want any part of it. And for them, it's not worth it. The fight for our country, our security, and our future, it's not worth it because they care more about their own reputation and their own political ambition.
Yeah, I mean, the fastest whistleblower to ever disappear from the face of the earth was the guy talking about boots on the ground in Ukraine, which of course I'm sure we have. I'm sure that's been hidden from Congress or from the people who are not the pro-war members who would actually call it out. But I mean, that's going on. This guy comes out. It was a big story for about 24 hours and then gone, never to be heard from again, never to be mentioned. No one talks about it because, of course, we're doing this. But yeah, I mean, that feels like the ultimate escalation with Russia, the world's largest, let's call it by by volume of nuclear warheads nation. I mean, again, for purposes we can't articulate, right? It'd be one thing if we were saying, hey, we're defending Ukraine for X, Y, Z, and we're going to mortgage our children's future for it. We're not believing the democracy route. Like that's not what this is about, right? Ukraine was rated a more corrupt country than Russia prior to becoming and Zelensky becoming like this deity, of the left and the Rhino Republicans.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because it is essential to remind everybody about this uniparty in Washington. There's a whole thing about how hyper-partisan Congress has become, and this great divide between the Democrats and the Republicans. And for a very long time now, that has been true. However, when it comes to this one issue, I think it's probably the only issue that they can come together around, and it is the issue of war. And people in both parties who are so committed to waging war against one country or another, toppling one dictator or another. But even after over 20 years of what should have been lessons learned from this costly decades of war that were counterproductive to our national security and our interests, still, it never ends. They will continue to find ways to feed the military-industrial complex and try to destroy anyone who stands in their wake. The American people can see this. The American people are saying, no, we don't want more of these senseless, counterproductive wars of choice. They don't have anything to do with us, our national security, our peace, or our ability to pursue prosperity. It has nothing to do with us, but they don't care. They're so out of touch, or they hear this and they just say, yeah, you know what? We got the power. We're going to keep moving on to what serves us, not the people.
Yeah, Trump was actually making peace, but war is big business for these people and for very few of them. And, again, they're playing with house money, right? It's the taxpayer money. So, if they just get a little piece of it, even if we're mortgaging ourselves to the future, to the hilt, I guess it doesn't really matter. But, while we're also talking about lawfare, not just warfare, what do you think about what we're seeing in terms of lawfare from the left? I know you said in your CPAC speech something to the effect of, my father's the only person you've ever met that you think could actually withstand all of this insanity. Talk about that a little bit. And is that sort of a play into being interested in a VP type position or some other position in the cabinet?
Yeah, I'm not interested in any kind of play or gamesmanship. I said what I said, and I say it in every platform I get because it's the truth. And the American people need to see the truth. And it's not disconnected, this lawfare you're talking about, it's not disconnected from what we were just talking about with the military-industrial complex and the war uniparty. You're right. President Trump, in his gut, he has wanted to fight for peace, and he fought for peace, and he wanted to end these nonsensical wars throughout the time that he was in office. That is a direct threat to their power. Yeah. Because as you know, and anyone who's paying attention knows, even people who might not like President Trump, they can't deny the fact that he went to Washington, and he will again go without caring about the Washington establishment or the political party bosses or the mainstream propaganda media or the military-industrial complex. He didn't care about pissing any of them off. And that's why they're so threatened by him. That's why Representative Schiff said in that clip what you just pointed out. Because the intelligence community, the national security state, and it's not everyone, but it's certainly the people who appear to be in charge, who are pulling the strings right now, they don't want to allow the possibility of the American people having the right to choose to vote for President Trump again, because they know that he will bring the courage necessary to clean house and get our country back on track.
Yeah, no, it's sort of crazy that we're even having these conversations, but I guess it is correct. I mean, crazy is just the world right now. I don't know. Did you have a chance to see that George Stephanopoulos interview with, Representative Nancy Mace this weekend by chance?
Yeah.
So what did you make of a Bill Clinton? I mean, literally Bill Clinton's spokesman trying to tell a rape victim how she should vote? Because honestly, I have a feeling that if it was reversed, if it was Trump saying something like this, that would be it. Like that it would be over, and it's like nothing happened. I mean, I think she totally destroyed him, and yet they'll play it off like it's not even an issue.
Well, first of all, kudos to her for even going and giving him the time of day. This is not a person who has a track record of honest and unbiased, journalistic integrity by any means. She did. She did a phenomenal job, but it was shameful to see not only how he shamed her, but how he showed no sympathy. You know, she shared her story, which I can't even imagine how difficult it has been.
That took a lot of guts, and I know she's not always. She's been hard on us at times as well, and that's fine. I've had a decent relationship with her, sort of, behind the scenes, but that took serious guts to actually do that on national television with a guy like that, and to be shamed for it. Again, and Bill Clinton's spokesperson, the guy that helped during the Monica Lewinsky stuff and others and numerous other scandals to this effect. That's the guy that's going to do it with a straight face, no less. I mean, that's pretty special.
Yeah. And you could tell he was getting aggravated with her because she wasn't going to play his game. So he not only shamed her as a rape victim, he put words in her mouth and tried to tell her, okay, so you believe this or you believe that, even though she was very clear in her response to his questions. And he didn't respect the fact that she was representing her constituency. She is representing the truth, and she's representing, hey, here's how we have to look forward. And when the thing that crossed my mind, Don, as I was watching that, is this is just another version of the Russia distraction.
Yeah.
They will find every opportunity to deflect and distract away from the facts and the truth, because they know that if they put President Biden and President Trump up side by side and say, okay, border security, how did they do? The economy, how did they do? Side by side. Inflation, how did they do? Yeah. National security, the issues of war and peace, how did they do? On every single one of these and more, President Trump has the superior position, the superior record, and the superior argument. They don't want to risk that. So instead, they're going to resort to these slimy smears and attacks against this woman who bravely had the courage to speak up as a rape victim, because there are so many who don't have the ability and who are too afraid to do so.
I think you're 100% right. But, speaking of sort of distractions, the wildfires we saw in Maui at the end of last year were beyond tragic. Obviously, that's got to hit incredibly. It should hit close to home, frankly, to anyone who's an American, right? But obviously, being in your home state, what did you make of the government's response to that catastrophe? Because I still feel like we don't have any answers, and more importantly, it doesn't feel like anyone's even asking any questions anymore. And yet, lives destroyed, death, mayhem, destruction, and it's almost like we're just moving on. Do we even know anything?
I went there 3 days after the fires occurred in August of last year, and what I saw shocked me. And I've seen a lot of different things. I'm well aware of how incapable many of our government agencies too often are. But what I saw there was not only a failure by the county and the state and the immediate so-called response by FEMA, but I saw a community that was in a time of historic tragedy and had been shut off from the rest of the island and the rest of the state. As I went around the side of the island where this fire occurred on West Maui, I went with a friend of mine who lives there, and we were talking to people, and I was asking, who's been here? Do you have emergency response people coming out? Because they had no comms. Mm-hmm. They were literally, we were saying, hey, how can we help you? They're like, we need radios so we can communicate, because there's no cell phone signals. We have no way to communicate. Oh, and by the way, the media has been blocked from being able to enter that side of the island, that entire side of the island. And people were pissed off because they said, what's wrong? They don't want the public to hear our voice. They don't want people to know the truth about what's happening here. And as time has gone on, now we're sitting in a place where the thousands of people who were displaced because of that fire, who won't have any opportunity to even think about rebuilding their homes for quite some time, they're wondering where they're going to stay. Where are they going to live? They've been put up in hotels and Airbnbs, but rent here in Hawaii is pretty expensive. A 2-bedroom house, easily, you'll pay at least $5,000 or $6,000 a month. That's not something that most people can afford. Mm-hmm. They've been left behind. The national headlines have moved on. I had hoped that Congress would hold some kind of oversight hearing, because as you can imagine, in a small state like ours, too often it's all about, hey, we got to protect our own. Let's cover it up a little bit and make sure everything looks kind of nice. There needs to be a serious objective assessment of what exactly happened and what steps need to be taken to prevent anything like this from happening again.
I'm sure you've heard some of the story. I'm trying to recall, from the time, but we can't allow water resources to be used for the fire because of environmental, limitation. I'm saying, what?
Yeah.
I read about, roads being blocked and people turned back into the fire because they're like, you can't all go out this way. We're not going to allow that. Then you hear the stuff about confiscating properties because, someone was wealthy enough to live on the water, so they got to repatriate. I mean, it was sort of, honestly, it was like, and it's such obviously a one-party state that you were like, it was the dumbest responses of typical insane, 2024 liberal nonsense. And yet there didn't seem to be sort of a representative level of disgust from the people. And I'm sure they're upset on the ground, but it's sort of like, is that just because it's just become mainstay that we're going to have just insane commentary on everything that happens, a total dearth of common sense when a tragedy strikes, and they were more concerned about the environmental ramifications of the fire than the lives and the livelihoods of the people who were affected? I mean, it was like one Onion article after another, and yet that was real. It was like real reporting, people really saying this with a straight face, as countless children were missing. And, if a child's missing after a week in a fire, it's probably not good news, but we weren't hearing any of it. I mean, it just seemed so insane.
I'll tell you, at a basic level on the ground, it was utter chaos and confusion. It was chaos and confusion. And so you had different elements of the police department there on the island of Maui, giving people different directions, not knowing exactly what was happening in one spot and not in another. Comm systems were going down even between them. The one assessment I have actually seen that's come out of this was from the Maui Police Department. They did a deep dive and looked at themselves and said, hey, what did we do wrong, and how was this allowed to happen? And they came up with something like 92 recommendations of things they needed to change themselves. And they sent that report all across the country to counties and cities so that other localities could learn from what went so wrong there. But there were interpersonal differences. The emergency management director was on a different island, didn't show up until a couple days after the fire happened, didn't go in front of a TV camera for, I don't even know what it was, a couple of weeks to speak to the people of his community. There were a lot of people super pissed off, and rightly so, about how their government at every level failed them. People who told me when I was there in the days after the fire saying, Tulsi, if only we were called Kiev or Ukraine, maybe then they would come and send us some help. Maybe then they would come and send us some
what
money.
was the number? I mean, we were while we're talking about it, I mean, we were talking about funding pensions in the Ukraine. Teachers and police, like the U.S., the American taxpayer should fund the pensions for people in Ukraine, because I'm like, wait, what? And they were going to write a check, a couple $100 for each member who lost homes and loved ones in it was literally like an insane contrast. We have, $150 billion for Ukraine, and we're going to fund their pensions because, they're the hardworking people of Ukraine. I guess the American taxpayer is obligated to pay for them. But, hey, people in Maui, right, here's $300-400, go about your day.
Well, this was actually in the White House press room when one of the White House pool reporters there asked a question of the FEMA director, exactly that, saying, what have you done? What have you actually done? Actually, don't just say, well, we've been there. What have you actually done for the people of Maui during this time of crisis? And the FEMA director stood there at the podium very proudly saying, oh, well, we're providing a one-time payment of $700 per family that's been displaced by this fire. I had a hard time believing that she could look herself in the mirror or stand there in a straight face as though she had done something really phenomenal. And that was exactly how people in Hawaii saw it. $700? Are you kidding me? That doesn't get you anything. That doesn't get you 2 nights in a freaking hotel room.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with exactly what you're talking about. We are, by the way, American taxpayers are funding the pensions of Ukrainians. We are funding their government. Their government would collapse without American taxpayer funding, or so they say. And yet we have this travesty happening still. People are still struggling on Maui today. We have, you mentioned earlier, the people of East Palestine, who still don't have clean water, no matter how much the EPA tells them it's fine.
But hey, those are more MAGA people than the people of Hawaii. But I'm sort of shut up. Like, hey, guess what?
No, you're right. You're right.
Like, no one's going to tell me that's not intentional, right? Joe Biden, he'll finally go over a year and a half later, and he'll say something because it's an election year, and Ohio's important, whatever it may be, and they got to have a Senate race that's up. I mean, I understand they're doing it because it's election season, not because of anything that actually happened. But you'd actually think that in Hawaii, at least the liberals will take care of their own there. But do you think anything actually changes in Hawaii when they look at their representatives and how badly they're clearly failing them, or whether it's they're pushing DEI, which is why they have incompetent administrators in the state, or is it just business as usual? It's going to be a Democrat uni party. I mean, do you think there's ever a chance that becomes like the catalyst for actual change and like putting, I don't know, competent people in positions of power?
I wish I had a hopeful answer for you. But honestly, I don't. I know that there are so many people across our state who are incredibly frustrated with how broken our government is, how long things take. There was a recent report that came out. Hawaii's cost of living and cost of housing is extraordinarily high. If you want to go and apply for a government designated affordable housing area, the median price of that affordable housing is $700,000 for a single family home. And so this report came out and said, well, what's the reason for the high cost of housing? The cost of housing is so high because of government bureaucracy, government regulations. And so I know that people are frustrated. I know that they want to be served better by those that they elect into these positions of power. The stranglehold on that power is strong. And I frankly, I don't know how many people are willing to step up and try to fight that because it is such a strong blockade. I hope that more people will, so that voters have a better choice before them and make that choice.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think, Democrats, the party used to be the parting of working people. I mean, that's not a surprise. That was what it was, but it feels like that's been totally left by the wayside. A lot of those people are now MAGA. It also wasn't that long ago that Democrats said they were opposed to illegal immigration. What changed that made the party move so far left on that issue? I can't, even putting on sort of the nonpartisan sort of reasonable hat, I can't articulate a reason how 12 million uneducated, unvetted people from all over the world, some of the least desirable place in the world, how this is a positive for our country. And yet, we're sold this bill of goods like this is the greatest thing to happen.
Yeah, when you look back at some of the old speeches that President Bill Clinton gave, and even President Obama, who I remember a lot of Democrats called the deporter in chief because he was taking some action to try to secure our borders. I think the biggest thing that I can point to is the so-called woke mob took over the Democrat Party. And that is who is in control of the party today, this elitist cabal of woke warmongers. And they are only looking at themselves and what can benefit themselves. And to me, I can't even explain this logically because it's not rational thinking, really. But that is their motive. And when you look at what's happening at the border and you look at, well, why would they continue to allow all these millions of people to come into our country illegally? Some of them actually believe in open borders. They really, in their heart of hearts, believe that we should have nothing but open borders, and everyone in the world who wants to come to America should be allowed to come, no matter what. But there's also a very ugly truth that exists, is that they're willing to turn a blind eye to the kinds of violent crimes and murders we're seeing in some of our communities, specifically because of this massive illegal immigration. They're willing to turn a blind eye to how even a lot of urban cities are being very, very stressed beyond their limits in being able to take care of people who are now on their streets or being put up in hotels and being paid more than our homeless veterans are. They see these people as future voters. And so they're looking not just at this coming election, but they're looking at elections to come. Some of these members of Congress have said it out loud, saying, hey, I need these people in my district for redistricting purposes. I need them to come here because it'll help me hold on to this seat. So they're looking at some of these states where you have either swing districts or even states like Texas that have traditionally voted Republican. they continue to see that as an opportunity to say, hey, if we just get enough of quote unquote our people there, then maybe we'll win. I just want to mention in that context, though, again, they think we're stupid. They treat, let's just Hispanic voters, for example. They take them for granted and say, well, of course, Hispanic voters are going to vote for Democrats. I don't know. Those numbers seem to be changing.
I think Hispanic voters have always been conservatives. They just didn't know it. I mean,
yes.
God, family, work ethic. I mean, like all these things that just seem entirely missing from the Democrat Party today. I'm like, they were conservatives that were just sold, a random bill of goods that never made any sense to me. I think, that's definitely coming around.
It is. And I think a lot of it has to do with how brazen the Democrat Party has become. I remember at different elections and different campaigns that were going on, the Democrats would at least put forward some kind of facade of, okay, yeah, we're going to go and speak at the pulpit in the church on Sunday, and we're going to try to make you believe that, we love God and we worship God and we're going to have your back. But their actions actually tell the story. I think the issue of school choice is a really good example. It's one I saw when I was running for president and campaigning through rural South Carolina. I ran into a lot of people who were really, really worried about their kids and the fact that they had no choice but to send them to their local school, which was crap. Their kids were not learning the basics, the basic foundational things of reading and writing and science and math.
But they know the 4,000 genders, yeah.
Exactly. But as I dug further into this, when you look across the country, I think the numbers now are over 70% of Americans, Black, white, Hispanic, people from all different parts of our social class, are saying, of course, as parents, we need to have the choice of where and how our child can best be educated, whether it's at a public school, a private school, a charter school, or homeschool, or religious school, or whatever it is. And the Democrats continue to try to take those parents' right away from them. And I think people are starting to see that and recognize that truth and how it's affecting them and their kids.
So education's obviously a big one. What are some of the other places? Obviously you were a congresswoman that was a Democrat. What are some of the other places where you sort of now aligned with conservatives on? Like, are there still places where you disagree with that? Are there issues where you've changed significantly? How do you talk about that sort of change? Not just the Democrat Party leaving, but where are the specific issues?
Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of different issues we could go through, and maybe there are some I agree with folks on, some I disagree with folks on, but maybe just to focus on a couple of the big ones. One related to education. I come from a strong union state here in Hawaii. And the history of unions in our state was that they were the groups that actually helped working people on the plantations fight for a basic living conditions, fight for an ability to not be paid in pennies, but actually a wage that they could feed their kids and their family with. It was the unions that came through. The wealthy Republican landowners were in power in the government at the time. And that was the big shift in Hawaii politics. It was because of the unions that came through and said, hey, we are fighting for you as working people, and we have your backs. And that was the origins of the Democrat Party rule in Hawaii. Well, fast forward to where we are today, these unions that initially started out with good intent have unfortunately become political arms of the Democrat elite and are leaving the people who pay them their dues and their paychecks behind in so many cases. They stood, I'll give you an example when I was in Congress, and one that a lot of my Democrat colleagues and unions got pissed off at me for was reforming the VA. We hear too many stories about how the VA, which literally exists to serve those who have borne the cost of war, serves its bureaucracy more than it serves our veterans. And so one of the issues is how hard it is to fire people in the VA or across the federal government as a whole, even those who have been caught on camera physically assaulting veterans. There have been a few different examples of this. So I worked with my colleagues, bipartisan effort in Congress to pass legislation that would make it easier to fire those people and make sure that the VA was actually serving our veterans. I got a knock on the door and the visit from representatives from the AFGE, the union that represents VA employees. And there was such a disconnect in that conversation. And it didn't matter how many times I told them, like, look, I'm a veteran of multiple deployments to war zones around the world. I continue to serve in the Army Reserve. You're trying to lecture me about what I'm doing to try to make sure our veterans are getting better care. Whose side are you really on? And this is the problem with these unions, whether it's the teachers' unions or many of the government employee unions. This is an area where there needs to be major reform because they're not serving the people that they were supposed to be or they're supposed to be serving anymore. They're serving political and governmental interests. And I think connected to that, there's a lot of good intentioned arguments being made about, well, hey, there's people suffering in a community. Let's see what we can do in the government to help them. I've seen and experienced over time and learned a lot, having had front row seats to how more often than not, when government inserts itself into these challenges and these problems, things get worse. They don't get better. And education is a huge one. There are so many things that we can get into there. We can get into the Department of Health and healthcare. I never got on board with Obamacare. It was passed a couple of years before I was elected to Congress because I heard from small business owners in my community who were telling me the truth about how much this was going to cost them and how it would very likely put many of them out of business. I talked to a friend of mine who is a single mom who found that she lived in the Midwest, that in her state, she was going to have to somehow fork out $1,500 a month for her health care for her and her baby, or face fines and some kind of punishment by the government. This was not the Affordable Health Care Act that the Democrats sold. And so I saw this when I came into Congress. I reached out to some of my Republican colleagues and said, hey, this thing is already passed into law. Let's see how we can try to fix what's broken. And we identified a few things that may have seemed minor, but would have actually made a difference that we could actually fix in the legislation. And here's the problem with the establishment Washington, Don. When we started to put these ideas forward, I was told by my party, not literally, but basically told, no, we're not interested in passing that legislation because if we do, we're going to have to admit that this legislation that we touted was the greatest healthcare legislation in the history of our country maybe wasn't so good after all. On the Republican side, my friends who were pursuing that with their party leadership were told, yeah, no, we're not going to push this forward either or support it because campaigning against Obamacare and Nancy Pelosi is pretty lucrative in the fundraising world, and we want to be able to run against it. So we don't actually want to solve these problems. Mm-hmm. And so this gets to the crux of, as we head into this critical election cycle, holding these people accountable and getting people in office in both parties, in all parties, who will put the interests of the American people and our country first, ahead of their party, ahead of special interests, ahead of the military-industrial complex. If we get people in office who really care about our country first and foremost, they'll have the courage to fight against these powerful entities and actually start to fix what is so completely broken in Washington.
Now, listen, I think that's an interesting point. I think probably changing people's minds, in real time. I'm just following the chat along, and a lot of people are saying, I really like her, but can I trust her? Again, and again, it's only because of the bifurcated nature of politics these days. I mean, my first political fundraiser ever was for Andrew Cuomo because I was a real estate developer from New York City, and the Attorney General literally signs off on every offering plan that you do. If you're going to sell a building, the Attorney General signs off on it. That's what he was running for. So I did that. And I understand, as a lifetime conservative, you can change those responses. But, what's your response to that? And if you get a call about vice president, something I've also seen a bunch here, and actually for the last few weeks, how are you responding to that call?
I'd be honored. I'd be honored to serve my country in that way. I'd be honored to actually be in a position to help President Trump execute his policies, bringing the experience that I have had of being on the front lines of many of these battles and actually understanding what we're up against. And so whether you're talking about securing the border, reducing inflation, improving our economy, stopping these Democrats and establishment Republicans, stopping these warmongers from continuing to push us closer and closer to war, not just in one country, but in multiple regions across the world. These are things, if I had the opportunity and privilege of being able to serve and support President Trump in actually executing these policies, I'd be honored to do so.
What's your prediction for 2024 right now?
You know, I'm encouraged to see the polls showing that President Trump is leading President Biden in many of these key states, but I think it is critical. It is critical that no one be complacent. And this is frankly why I'm going out and I've got this book, is to be able to tell the American people the truth, the lessons and the experiences that I've had and that I've learned along the way, telling them the truth about the Democrat elite and how they are intent on destroying our country. They are intent on undermining our fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Constitution, and that they're willing to do this brazenly in broad daylight because they only care about power.
Yeah.
Now, to all of the folks who are leaving comments, or those who may be watching this and who are questioning and who may wonder, hey, can I trust her? Or how do we know that you really believe in what you're saying? Well, you can read the book, but I'll tell you, I believe in what I'm saying because I love our country. I wouldn't be here saying it if it wasn't true. If I didn't care deeply about what was going on in this country right now, trust me, I'd stay out here in Hawaii and go surfing every day.
And it doesn't suck.
Let this whole thing play out. It doesn't
not
suck
a terrible
at all.
place to live. Yeah.
But also, Don, I want to mention something that I think is really important, and it's a message I'm sharing everywhere that I go, which is we have to have conversations with people who may not think exactly like us or who may have a different background from us. The only way that we make changes in this country is by casting our vote and changing those who are abusing their power, getting them out of office. That's going to require you being able to share your experience or your strong feelings, the things you care most about, with others who may not have had that experience. Start those conversations, have that dialogue, and create that opening for people to say, you know what? I never really thought about it that way before. You've given me something really important to think about as I go and make this critical decision about who I want to lead our country as President, Commander-in-Chief, who I want to serve in Congress and the U.S. Senate, the people that we are charging the responsibility of our future with.
What's the biggest issue right now that isn't getting enough attention? What do you see out there? I know you travel all over the place. You're one of the harder working peoples out there. I see you on every show. You're definitely putting in the time. What do you hear from the people? What do you think that they're not talking about that's going to be a big issue?
I think there are a lot of domestic issues, but I'll tell you the one that I don't hear very many people talking about at all, and it's something that we're seeing play out not only in the Middle East, but it's become an increasing concern here in America, given the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies. And that is the fact that Islamist terrorism is the greatest short and long-term threat to our freedom and our ability to live in peace. When you look at what's happening in the Middle East right now, this war between Israel and Hamas, this was not just the latest incursion of what has been a decades-long fight between the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. When you look at Hamas's charter, their goal is very clear. It is the destruction of Israel, the extermination of Jewish people, and their desire, like all these other Islamist terrorist organizations, whether it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, or others, their goal is to establish an Islamic caliphate around the world and to kill or convert all of the quote-unquote infidels, the non-believers. And you look at what's happening, and this has been playing out, whether it's on social media or the mainstream media, you're seeing these mobs of people all around the world wearing Hamas bandanas, standing up for Hamas. Do they really know what Hamas actually
in American
stands
cities?
for?
I mean, it's
in American
insane.
cities as well. And so you see
it's
how
like a boy band.
people,
They're very popular, apparently.
And that is exactly the concern. That people are so easily, some people are so easily influenced by their ideology. That is one that, as you pointed out earlier, I think it was was the Air Force general, the spokesperson for the DOD, saying, well, you know, if Hamas really cares about the Palestinian people, they don't care about the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
Their whole thing is celebrating martyrdom.
Yeah.
This is a group that celebrates death. So how can you even begin to negotiate peace or a true ceasefire when they deify death? They celebrate martyrdom. And so connecting what's going on in the Middle East to what the crisis that's happening on our borders, we know that there are military-age men from all over the world who are streaming across our borders. We know that Hezbollah, and I know that there are others who have sleeper cells already in our country, just waiting for that signal to launch a devastating and catastrophic terrorist attack on our soil. So the consequences are very real, but you will hear very few Democrat and Republican leaders talking about the seriousness of this threat that has to be defeated not only militarily, but ideologically.
Well, Tulsi, thank you so much. I encourage everyone to go check out the book. Where can they find that? Just so, you know, is there a preferred source that you want to go through?
You can go to tulsigabbard.com, or you can get the book on Amazon. Pre-sales are available now, and it'll be coming to your mailbox soon.
Well, Tulsi, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. I think that was an incredible
Thanks,
conversation, an important one for everyone to hear. And guys, make sure that you're liking, sharing, subscribing. I see how many people are watching. I see the like buttons. It's a pretty easy one. Let's get those reconciled. That's how we get the message out there. Don't forget, also, you can get this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So if you have friends that get their podcast that way, subscribe, send it to them. Let's make sure we get the message out. Don't forget to check out our incredible sponsors. Head over to friends.rumble.cloud and sign up today. It's obviously Rumble's cloud services. You've seen, Amazon canceling conservative or patriotic businesses. You build up, you're dependent, and then you're gone like that. Rumble, that's not going to happen. Obviously, independent infrastructure, separated, not just a backtrack to Amazon Web Services, these kinds of things. So check that out. Also, check out SuperBeats and get a free 30-day supply on all bundles and an extra 15% off your order by going to getsuperbeats.com using promo code TRIGGERED. That's getsuperbeets.com, promo code TRIGGERED. Check that out. For those of you who subscribe and follow on Locals, I'm going to head over there, do my Ask Me Anything. So I'm going to head over there right now. Check it out. Again, guys, like, share, subscribe, support the businesses that support us. You can see the links down there in our bio in case you forgot the URLs. Go check them out. Support those businesses. Vote with your wallet. That's one way to do it. And Locals, guys, I'll see you over there in a couple of seconds. Be well, guys, and I'll see you on Thursday.